I never thought the quietest moment of my life would happen in a crowded room full of people. It was my son's wedding day. The room was full of laughter, music, and clinking glasses. Everyone seemed happy. Everyone except me. I stood near the back of the hall, holding a small gift bag in my hands, watching my only son smile for photos that I wasn't part of. He laughed with his friends. He hugged his mother. He shook hands with people I didn't recognize. And when his eyes passed over me, they didn't stop. It was like I wasn't there. That hurt more than I can explain. I didn't expect a big speech. I didn't need a spotlight. I just thought, maybe a nod, a smile, something to say, yeah, that's my dad. But nothing came. As the music played and the guests cheered, I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not anger, not jealousy, just a deep, quiet sadness that made it hard to breathe. I kept thinking about the nights I worked late, the mornings I came home tired, the meals I skipped so he could eat more. And yet, in this moment, I felt invisible. I remember gripping the gift bag tighter, feeling my hands shake slightly. Inside was a simple watch. Nothing expensive, just something I thought he might wear someday and remember me by. I told myself not to cry. Men my age learn how to hold things in. We learn how to swallow feelings and keep our faces still. But it was hard, because standing there, watching my son celebrate one of the biggest days of his life without acknowledging me, made me question everything. Did I fail him? Did I do something wrong? Was all those years of effort not enough? I thought back to when he was a little boy, holding my finger as we crossed the street. Back when he would run to the door when he heard my footsteps. Back when he believed I could fix anything. Somewhere along the way, that version of me disappeared from his life. And I didn't even know when it happened. As the ceremony continued, people around me clapped and cheered. I clapped too, slowly, quietly, trying to blend in. I didn't want anyone to notice the man in the corner whose heart was breaking. I stayed longer than I should have. I told myself maybe he would come over later. Maybe after the speeches. Maybe after the dances. But deep down, I already knew. I wasn't part of his day. And maybe I wasn't part of his life anymore. That realization didn't hit like a storm. It came like a slow sunset. Soft. Final. Unavoidable. I left the hall without saying goodbye. I didn't want to ruin his happiness with my presence. I didn't want pity. I just wanted peace. As I walked to my car, the music faded behind me. The night air felt cold, even though it wasn't. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time before turning the key. And that's when the memories started coming back. All the years. All the sacrifices. All the moments I thought mattered. This isn't just a story about a wedding. It's a story about a father who gave everything he had. And a son who forgot where it came from. When I think back to the beginning, I don't remember big moments first. I remember small ones. The sound of an old alarm clock ringing at 5 in the morning. The smell of cheap coffee filling the kitchen. The way the floor felt cold under my bare feet when I stood up before the sun. That was my life back then. I became a father earlier than I planned. I was young. I was scared. But the moment I held my son for the first time, something inside me changed. He was so small. His fingers wrapped around mine like he was afraid I might disappear. I promised myself I never would. His mother and I tried to make things work. For a while we did. We were never perfect, but we were a family. We lived in a small apartment with thin walls and old furniture. The heat barely worked in winter, and in summer the air felt heavy and still. But it was home. I worked my first job during the day. Construction. Hard work. Long hours. My hands were always rough, always sore. Some days I came home covered in dust, sweat sticking to my skin, my back aching in ways I didn't know it could ache. At night, I worked a second job, cleaning offices. I didn't tell many people about that one. Not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want anyone worrying. I would leave again after dinner, while my son slept in his crib. I kissed his forehead every night before walking out the door. Sometimes he stirred. Sometimes his eyes opened just a little. I'd whisper, "Daddy will be back." And I always was. Money was always tight. Every dollar had a job. Rent, food, diapers, utilities. There was never much left over, but I didn't mind. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself it would get easier. Some days it did. Some days it didn't. When my son got older, he started asking questions. Why was I always tired? Why did I leave at night? Why wasn't I home like other dads? I tried to explain in simple words. Daddy works so you can have what you need. He nodded like he understood, but I could see it in his eyes. He missed me. That hurt more than the exhaustion. His mother and I started arguing more as the years passed. Stress has a way of finding weak spots and pressing on them. We disagreed about money, about parenting, about life. We stopped talking and started snapping. Eventually, the silence became louder than the arguments. When we separated, my son was still young, old enough to remember, too young to understand. We told him it wasn't his fault. We said all the right things. But I know children feel the truth even when words hide it. After the separation, things got harder. I moved into a smaller place, a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and noisy neighbors. I slept on a couch so my son could have the bedroom when he stayed with me. I didn't complain. Those weekends with him were the best part of my life. I waited for them all week. I planned simple things. Pancakes in the morning, walks to the park, cheap movies on a small TV. He liked when I read to him at night. I wasn't great at voices, but he laughed anyway. Sometimes he fell asleep halfway through the story, his head resting on my arm. I stayed still until he was fully asleep, even when my arm went numb. I didn't want to wake him. As he grew older, the world around him changed. School, friends, new interests. I tried to keep up. I went to parent meetings when I could. I showed up to school events, even when I was tired. I remember one school play. I arrived late, still wearing my work clothes. I stood in the back, not wanting to draw attention. When he came on stage, his eyes scanned the room. When he saw me, he smiled. That smile carried me for weeks. But life has a way of pulling people in different directions. His mother remarried. Her new husband had a steady job, a nice house, 2 cars. He was kind enough, but he wasn't me. And slowly, my son's life started revolving more around that home than mine. I understood. At least, I told myself I did. I couldn't give him everything. I couldn't buy the latest things. I couldn't always be there. But I gave him my time, my effort, my love. I hoped that would be enough. As he became a teenager, things changed between us. He talked less. He stayed in his room more. Our conversations became shorter. Awkward. I didn't know how to fix that. I tried asking about school, about friends, about his dreams. He answered politely, but distant, like he was talking to someone he didn't fully know anymore. And maybe that was true. I was always working, always tired, always chasing stability. I missed things without realizing it. Moments that didn't seem big at the time, but mattered later. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes. I was quiet when I should have spoken. I focused on survival when maybe I should have focused more on connection. Still, I never stopped caring. When he graduated high school, I cried quietly in my seat. I watched him walk across the stage, taller than me now, confident, sure of himself. I felt proud. I also felt scared, because I could feel him slipping further away. College came next. He moved out. We talked less. Phone calls became short. Visits became rare. I told myself this was normal, that this was just part of growing up. I didn't want to be the clingy father, so I stepped back. Maybe too much. Years passed. I kept working. I saved what little I could. I lived simply. I didn't date much. I didn't travel. My life became small, but manageable. My son became successful. He had a good job, nice clothes, confidence. People respected him. I respected him too. When he told me he was getting married, I felt something warm spread through my chest. Pride, hope, a chance to reconnect. I congratulated him. I told him how happy I was for him. He thanked me, but something felt off. I didn't hear from him much after that. Details came slowly, often through others. I didn't ask many questions. I didn't want to intrude. I told myself I would show up on the day. That would be enough. I never imagined what that day would feel like. Looking back now, I can see the signs, the distance, the silence, the polite tone that replaced warmth. But at the time, I held on to hope. Hope has a quiet way of keeping you going, even when it shouldn't. And that hope followed me all the way to the wedding hall, right up to the moment when my son looked through me like I was just another guest. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was built over years. Years of work, years of absence, years of love that went unseen. And standing there, alone, I finally understood something I didn't want to admit. Sometimes, giving everything you have still doesn't mean the other person will feel it. I used to believe distance happened suddenly, like a door slamming shut. But now I know the truth. Distance grows quietly. It builds in small moments, in missed calls, in conversations that never happen, in feelings that stay unspoken for too long. After my son left for college, our relationship changed in ways I didn't fully understand at the time. At first, I called him often, maybe too often. I asked about his classes, his roommates, his life. I told him I missed him. I told him to take care of himself. He answered politely, always respectful, but something in his voice felt rushed, distracted, like he was already moving on while I was still holding on. So I started calling less. I told myself I was giving him space. But space, when left alone, turns into silence. Weeks passed between calls, then months. Sometimes I would text just to say hello. Sometimes he replied. Sometimes he didn't. I never confronted him. I didn't want to sound needy. I didn't want to be a burden. I thought being a good father meant stepping back and letting him live his life. I see now how wrong I was. Years went by like that. He graduated. He got a job. He moved to a different city. Each milestone reached me like news about a distant relative. I was proud, truly, but I felt left behind. When we did see each other, the conversations felt stiff. We talked about safe things. Work, weather, news. Never feelings. Never the past. There was so much I wanted to say. I wanted to explain why I worked so much. Why I missed things. Why I wasn't always there the way he needed. But I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding like I was making excuses. So I stayed quiet. Silence became my habit. One day, I overheard someone say something that stuck with me. They said, "Kids don't remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel." That sentence hit me hard. I started wondering how I made my son feel growing up. Did he feel supported? Or abandoned? Loved? Or second to my work? I couldn't answer those questions honestly. That uncertainty followed me everywhere. Then came the first real crack. It was his birthday. A big one. I sent him a message early in the morning. A long one. I told him how proud I was of him. How much he meant to me. He replied hours later with a short thank you. No call. No follow-up. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling foolish for expecting more. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying memories, trying to figure out where things went wrong, wondering if there was a moment I could point to and say, "That's when I lost him." But life doesn't work like that. It's 1,000 small choices. Some mine, some his, and none of them felt important at the time. Not long after that, I learned he was living with someone. I found out through a mutual friend. Not from him. That hurt more than I expected. I realized I was no longer someone he shared his life with. I was just someone who existed in the background. I wanted to talk to him about it. I wanted to ask why he didn't tell me things anymore. But fear stopped me. Fear of hearing the truth. Fear of confirming what I already suspected. That he resented me. Resentment has a way of hiding itself until it doesn't. Looking back, I can see it in the way he spoke to me. Polite, but distant. Respectful, but cold. Like he was talking to someone he owed something to, not someone he felt close to. I don't blame him entirely. I missed birthdays. I missed school events. I missed ordinary days that mattered more than I realized. I chose work because I thought that was love. But love needs presence. And I wasn't always present. Still, I hoped time would heal things. I believed that one day we would sit down and talk. That we would clear the air. That he would understand why I did what I did. But time didn't heal us. It just moved us further apart. When he called to tell me he was engaged, I felt a mix of emotions. Happiness. Surprise. Fear. I congratulated him. I told him how glad I was. I asked about the wedding. He gave me basic details. Date. Location. Nothing else. I waited for more. It didn't come. I wasn't asked for advice. I wasn't included in planning. I wasn't part of any conversation beyond the surface. I told myself it was okay. This is his life, I said. This is his moment. But deep down, I felt like a guest in my own son's story. As the wedding approached, I tried to reconnect. I called more. I texted more. I asked how things were going. The replies stayed short. I felt like I was trying to hold water in my hands. The harder I tried, the more it slipped away. A week before the wedding, I asked him directly if everything was okay between us. There was a long pause on the phone. Then he said, "Yeah, everything's fine." But his voice said otherwise. I wanted to push, to ask more, to say something real. But I didn't. I was afraid of ruining what little connection we had left. So I let it go. That decision haunts me now, because sometimes silence is louder than words. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early. I dressed carefully. I wanted to look nice, respectable, like someone who belonged there. As guests arrived, I watched families greet each other. Parents hugging children, fathers laughing with sons. I stood alone. When my son arrived, surrounded by people, he looked confident, happy, and distant. When our eyes met, there was no warmth, no recognition beyond a polite glance. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just about the wedding. This was about everything that came before it. All the things we never said. All the feelings we never shared. All the distance we let grow without fighting it. Standing there, invisible, I felt the weight of every missed moment pressed down on me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to turn back time. But I did none of those things. I did what I always did. I stayed quiet. And in that silence, the conflict reached its peak. Because the hardest truth I had to face was this. I didn't lose my son in one moment. I lost him slowly. And by the time I realized it, I didn't know how to reach him anymore. After the wedding, life did not return to normal. It became quieter. The drive home that night felt longer than usual. The streets were almost empty. Traffic lights changed from red to green even when no cars were around. I drove slowly, not because I was tired, but because I didn't want to arrive anywhere. When I finally reached my apartment, I sat in the car with the engine off. The silence inside that space felt heavy. I held the steering wheel and stared straight ahead, thinking about how full the wedding hall had been and how empty I felt now. I carried the gift bag inside. The watch was still there. I placed it on the kitchen table and sat across from it like it was another person. I kept imagining my son's wrist. I wondered if he would have liked it, if he would have worn it. That thought hurt more than I expected. I went to bed without eating. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. Not smiling, not angry, just distant. That distance stayed with me. The days after the wedding blended together. I went to work. I came home. I ate when I remembered to. I slept when exhaustion forced me to. Everything felt dull, like the world had lost some of its color. I stopped checking my phone as often. I already knew there would be no messages from him. I replayed the wedding in my head over and over. I wondered if I imagined the way he looked past me. If maybe I expected too much. If maybe I misunderstood. But deep down, I knew the truth. I wasn't part of his life anymore. That realization settled in slowly. At first, I tried to distract myself. I worked longer hours. I stayed busy. I told myself this pain would pass like everything else. But pain ignored doesn't disappear. It waits. At night, when everything was quiet, it came back stronger. I thought about all the times I wasn't there. All the moments I missed. All the things I assumed he understood without ever explaining. I wondered if he felt abandoned. If he felt like work mattered more than he did. That thought crushed me. I never wanted him to feel that way. I worked to protect him, to provide for him, to give him stability. But maybe what he needed was something I couldn't give while chasing survival. Presents. One evening, I found an old photo album in a box under my bed. I hadn't opened it in years. I sat on the floor and turned the pages slowly. There he was, a toddler with messy hair, a little boy with scraped knees, a teenager trying to look older than he was. In so many of those pictures, I was behind the camera. I wasn't in them. I didn't realize how symbolic that was until that moment. I was always there, but never fully visible. I put the album away and cried for the first time in years. Not loud crying, just quiet tears that fell without effort. Tears that carried regret, love, and loss all at once. I cried for the father I thought I was, and for the father my son needed but maybe never had. Days turned into weeks. I avoided places that reminded me of him. I avoided conversations that might bring his name up. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to explain the emptiness I carried. People at work noticed I was quieter. Someone asked if I was okay. I said yes. That was easier than telling the truth. The truth was, I felt like my purpose had faded. For years, everything I did was for my son. My sacrifices had meaning because they were for him. Now, I didn't know who I was working for anymore. The loneliness felt different than being alone. It felt final. I started questioning my worth. As a father, as a man, as someone who mattered in another person's life. I thought about calling him. Many times. I picked up the phone and put it down again. I typed messages and erased them before sending. What would I even say? Why don't you love me? Why did you ignore me? I tried my best. None of those felt right. I didn't want to guilt him. I didn't want to pressure him. I didn't want to make his life harder. So I stayed silent. Again. But silence has consequences. The more time passed, the heavier the silence became. It pressed down on my chest. It followed me everywhere. It made even simple things feel exhausting. I lost interest in things I once enjoyed. Food tasted bland. Music felt distant. Conversations drained me. I wasn't depressed in the way people imagine. I was just empty. One night, I dreamed about him. He was a child again, standing at the door, asking if I was coming to his school event. I told him I couldn't, that I had to work. He nodded like he understood. Then he turned away. I woke up with my heart racing and my pillow wet with tears. That dream stayed with me. It made me realize something painful. I had been teaching him his whole life that work came first. And maybe he learned that lesson too well. Maybe he learned that people leave. Maybe he learned not to rely on me. That thought broke something inside me. I started blaming myself for everything. For the divorce. For the distance. For the wedding. For the silence. I forgot that relationships are built by two people. I forgot that my son also made choices. All I could see were my failures. The days grew shorter. Winter came. The cold made the nights feel longer. I sat by the window sometimes, watching the world move while I stayed still. I felt old. Not in my body. In my spirit. There were moments when I wondered if this was how my life would end. Quiet. Unnoticed. Forgotten. Those thoughts scared me. But they also forced me to stop and think. I asked myself a question I had avoided for years. What if staying silent is the worst thing I can do? What if my fear of saying the wrong thing has already cost me everything? That question lingered. I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time since the wedding, something shifted. The pain was still there. The regret was still heavy. But beneath it, a small spark appeared. A realization that this fall, this deep emotional collapse, might be forcing me to finally face the truth. That love without honesty is fragile. And that sometimes, to save what's left, you have to risk being hurt again. The change didn't come with a loud moment. There was no argument. No dramatic phone call. No sudden apology or confession. It came quietly, like most truths do. It was a regular evening. Nothing special about it. I had just come home from work, my body tired in the usual way. I made a simple dinner and ate alone at the small kitchen table. The watch I never gave him was still in the drawer. I hadn't touched it since the wedding. After eating, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall. The TV was on, but I wasn't watching it. I was thinking about the same things I had been thinking about for weeks. The distance, the silence, the feeling of being erased. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't rush to check it. I almost ignored it. I assumed it was nothing important. A notification, a reminder, something I could deal with later. But when I finally picked it up, I froze. It was a message from my son. Just seeing his name on the screen made my chest tighten. My hands shook as I opened it. The message was short. "Hey Dad, do you have a minute?" That was it. No emotion. No explanation. Just a question. I stared at those words for a long time. I was afraid to answer. Not because I didn't want to talk to him, but because I didn't know what this conversation would bring. Hope can be dangerous when you've been disappointed too many times. I typed back slowly. Of course. The three dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Minutes passed. Each second felt heavy. Finally, another message came through. "I've been meaning to talk to you. I just didn't know how." I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes. That sentence alone felt like a crack in a wall that had been standing for years. I told him I was listening, and then he sent a message I didn't expect. "I didn't ignore you at the wedding because I hate you." That stopped my breath. I read it again to make sure I understood. Then again. He continued. "I just didn't know how to face you." Those words stayed with me. Not anger. Not rejection. Fear. I asked him what he meant. There was a long pause. Then a longer message arrived. He told me things he had never said out loud before. He told me he grew up feeling like he had to earn my attention, that he saw how hard I worked and felt guilty asking for more, that he learned early not to complain, not to need too much, not to depend. He said he knew I loved him, but love, to him, felt distant, like something he understood in his head but didn't always feel in his heart. That hurt, but it also made sense. He told me that at the wedding, seeing me brought everything back. The childhood, the confusion, the feelings he never sorted through. He said he wasn't ready to deal with it on a day that was supposed to be about starting a new life. So he avoided me, not out of cruelty, out of fear. As I read his words, tears rolled down my face. Not because he blamed me, but because he finally let me see his pain. For the first time, I understood something important. My silence taught him to be silent too. My distance taught him to protect himself. My strength taught him that feelings were something to manage alone. I had spent years believing I was doing the right thing by staying strong, staying quiet, staying out of the way. But strength without vulnerability creates walls. And walls don't protect love. They isolate it. I told him I was sorry. Not in a dramatic way. Not with excuses. Just honest words. "I'm sorry I wasn't there the way you needed me. I didn't know how to be both a provider and an emotional presence. I thought giving you everything I could was enough. He replied, I know you tried, Dad. I really do. That sentence broke something open inside me. Because trying matters. But understanding matters more. We talked for hours that night. About things we should have talked about years ago. About the divorce. About his childhood. About the things we both carried quietly. I told him about the nights I worked late. The fear I lived with. The pressure to survive. The belief that my role was to endure, not to feel. He listened. Really listened. He told me he didn't want to lose me. That he just didn't know how to rebuild something he never fully understood. That was the moment everything shifted. I realized something important. This wasn't a story about rejection. It was a story about two people who loved each other but spoke different emotional languages. I spoke sacrifice. He spoke presence. Neither of us was wrong. We were just disconnected. I also realized something else. I had been waiting for forgiveness when what we both needed was understanding. I didn't need to be perfect. I needed to be honest. That night didn't fix everything. It didn't erase years of distance. But it opened a door. A real one. Not based on guilt or obligation, but on truth. After that conversation, I felt lighter. Still sad. Still cautious. But no longer invisible. I wasn't erased from his life. I had just been misunderstood. And so had he. The pain of the wedding didn't disappear. But it changed shape. It became a lesson instead of a wound. I understood now that love isn't proven by how much you sacrifice. It's proven by how much you're willing to be seen. For years, I hid behind work because it felt safe. Now, I was learning how to show up emotionally. Late, but not too late. And that realization carried me forward into something I never expected. Hope. After that night, nothing in my life changed all at once. There was no sudden happiness. No instant healing. No perfect reunion. What changed was something quieter. I stopped pretending everything was fine. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to sit with uncomfortable feelings without running from them. I didn't drown them in work. I didn't bury them in silence. I just let them exist. That alone felt new. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, hope, fear. They all lived together inside me, not fighting, just sharing space. I checked my phone. No new messages. And that was okay. Because for the first time, silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like breathing room. I went to work that day, but my mind wasn't fully there. I kept replaying my son's words. The way he said he knew I tried. The way he admitted he was scared. The way he finally spoke honestly. I realized something important. I had spent my whole life believing that love was proven by endurance, by sacrifice, by how much pain you could take without complaining. But love isn't just about carrying weight. It's about sharing it. That was a lesson I learned too late to change the past, but not too late to shape the future. I didn't call my son right away. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to reach out again, to keep the conversation going, to make up for lost time. But I didn't. I remembered how pressure feels. I remembered how overwhelming emotions can be when you're not ready for them. So I waited. A few days later, he messaged me again. How are you holding up? That question stayed with me. No one had asked me that in a long time. I told him the truth. I'm okay. Thinking a lot. He replied, me too. That became our new rhythm. Short messages. Honest ones. No pretending. No rushing. We didn't talk every day, and that was fine. What mattered was that when we did talk, it was real. I started sharing things about my life that I never thought were worth mentioning. Small things. What I cooked for dinner. A memory that came back suddenly. A feeling I didn't understand yet. At first, it felt awkward. Like learning to use a muscle that had been weak for years. But slowly, it became easier. I realized how little I had shared about myself when he was growing up. He knew I worked hard. He knew I was tired. But he didn't know why. He didn't know how afraid I was of failing him. He didn't know how lonely I felt sometimes. He didn't know how often I questioned myself. I thought protecting him meant hiding my struggles. But hiding taught him that feelings were dangerous. So I stopped hiding. One evening, he asked me something that caught me off guard. Did you ever feel like giving up back then? I didn't answer right away. Then I told him the truth. Yes, many times. There was a pause. Then he said, I wish I had known that. That sentence told me everything. He didn't want a perfect father. He wanted a human one. We started talking about the wedding again. Carefully, gently, without blame. He apologized for how things happened. Not because I demanded it, but because he understood how much it hurt. I told him I forgave him. And I meant it. Forgiveness didn't feel like losing. It felt like setting something down I was tired of carrying. One day, I told him about the watch. I told him I bought it for the wedding, that I never gave it to him, that it sat in a drawer, untouched. He asked me to send a picture. When I did, he replied, "It's nice. Very you." That made me smile. A few weeks later, he asked if we could meet. Not for a big talk, just coffee. I said yes without hesitation. The day we met, I arrived early. Old habits die hard. I sat at a small table near the window, watching people walk by. My hands rested on my knees, calm but nervous. When he walked in, I stood up. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then we hugged. It wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. We talked about simple things. Work, life, his new routine, my job, the weather. Then, naturally, the deeper things came. Not all at once. Just enough. I listened more than I spoke. That was another lesson. For years, I thought being a father meant teaching. Now I understood it also meant learning. Learning how to listen. Learning how to let go of control. Learning how to meet someone where they are, not where you wish they were. When we said goodbye, he said something that stayed with me. "I'm glad we're talking again." So was I. Rebuilding doesn't happen with grand gestures. It happens with consistency, with patience, with showing up without expectations. I stopped trying to fix the past. I focused on being present now. I learned to ask how he was feeling and wait for the answer. I learned to accept silence without panic. I learned that closeness doesn't mean constant contact. It means trust. As time passed, the pain of the wedding softened. It didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled me. I saw it for what it was. A moment that revealed a deeper truth. That love without communication can drift, even when intentions are good. I started looking at my own life differently too. I stopped working extra hours I didn't need. I allowed myself rest. I allowed myself to feel. I reached out to people I had neglected. Old friends. Family. I apologized when I needed to. I learned that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about being willing to heal. One evening, my son asked me something that felt like a gift. "Would you like to come over for dinner sometime?" I said yes. Of course I said yes. When I left that night, I realized something important. I was no longer waiting to be included. I was participating. Not as a perfect father. Not as a hero. Just as a man who loved his son and was finally learning how to stay emotionally present. And that, I realized, might be the most important lesson of all. After that dinner invitation, I noticed something subtle happening inside me. I stopped bracing myself for disappointment. For a long time, I had lived with my shoulders slightly raised, my heart guarded, always expecting the next moment of distance or silence. Even when things began to improve, part of me was still waiting for it to fall apart again. But slowly, that tension eased. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally understood the truth. My son and I weren't broken. We were unfinished. The dinner at his place was simple. Nothing fancy. A quiet evening. Just the two of us and his wife. She was kind, polite, a little nervous, maybe. I could see she didn't fully know where I fit yet. I didn't blame her. I wasn't sure either. I brought dessert. Something store-bought. I never learned how to bake. We sat at the table and talked. Laughed a little. Paused sometimes. Let the silence sit without rushing to fill it. That felt new. When I left that night, I didn't feel empty. I felt tired in a good way. Like the kind of tired that comes from emotional effort, not emotional loss. On the drive home, I realized something important. Rebuilding doesn't mean going back to how things were. It means building something new. Something honest. Something that fits who we are now. I stopped wishing for the father-son relationship I thought we should have had. The one I imagined. The one I compared us to in my head. Comparison had been poisoning my peace. Instead, I started appreciating what we were creating. Something slower, quieter, more intentional. I also started forgiving myself. That didn't come easily. There were nights when guilt still crept in. When I thought about the missed birthdays, the school events I didn't attend, the evenings I chose work over conversation, those memories didn't disappear, but they stopped defining me. I learned that regret can teach you, but it shouldn't own you. One afternoon, while cleaning my apartment, I found an old notebook. It was filled with notes from years ago, budgets, work schedules, lists of things I needed to do. In between those pages were reminders I had forgotten. Pick up son from school. Call teacher. Movie night. I realized something painful and comforting at the same time. I had tried. Imperfectly. Quietly. Often unsuccessfully. But genuinely. That mattered. I stopped rewriting my past as a story of failure. I started seeing it as a story of survival. Survival with love. Survival with fear. Survival with good intentions and limited understanding. My son and I continued talking regularly. Not constantly. Not intensely. Just steadily. Sometimes he called me for advice. Sometimes I asked him questions. Sometimes we just shared ordinary moments. Those moments mattered more than the big talks. One day he told me he was struggling at work. Not with tasks, but with pressure, expectations, the feeling that he always had to be strong. I listened quietly. Then I said something I wish I had said years earlier. You don't have to carry everything alone. He was quiet after that. Then he said, I know. I'm learning. That sentence made me realize how deeply patterns repeat. He had learned my strength. Now he was learning my lesson. I saw myself in him more clearly than ever. And for the first time, that didn't scare me. It humbled me. I understood that my role as a father hadn't ended. It had changed. I wasn't there to shape his life anymore. I was there to walk beside it. That shift brought peace. I also learned something else. Healing doesn't erase pain. It gives it meaning. The wedding day would always hurt a little. That moment of being unseen would never fully disappear. But it no longer felt like rejection. It felt like a mirror, showing me what needed to change. I started speaking more openly with people in my life. Friends, co-workers, family. I admitted when I was tired, when I felt lonely, when I didn't have answers. To my surprise, people responded with kindness. I had spent so many years believing strength meant silence. Now I saw that strength could also be softness. One evening, my son and I talked about children. He didn't have any yet, but he said he wanted to someday. He asked me something that made my heart stop for a moment. What would you do differently? I didn't rush to answer. Then I said the truth. I would talk more. I would listen more. I would let them see me struggle sometimes. He nodded. I want to do that too. That felt like healing reaching across generations. I realized then that even though I couldn't change the past, I could still influence the future. Not through money, not through sacrifice, but through presence, through honesty, through showing up emotionally, even when it felt uncomfortable. I also made peace with something else. My son didn't owe me anything. Not gratitude. Not closeness. Not validation. Love given with conditions isn't love. And love measured by recognition is fragile. I learned to love without expecting. That freedom changed everything. When holidays came around again, they felt different. Less heavy. Less loaded with meaning. More natural. Sometimes we spent them together. Sometimes we didn't. Either way, I was okay. Because I knew where I stood. Not at the center of his life. But not outside it either. And that was enough. One quiet night, sitting alone again, I opened the drawer and took out the watch. I held it for a long time. Then I put it back. I realized something surprising. I didn't need to give it to him anymore. The moment had passed. And that was okay. Some gifts are symbols. Some lessons are lived. The real gift had already been exchanged. Understanding. And as I sat there, reflecting on everything that had happened, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not the kind that comes from everything being perfect, but the kind that comes from accepting what is, and choosing to love anyway. As time moved forward, I began noticing changes in myself that had nothing to do with my son. My hair thinned a little more. My joints ached in the mornings. I tired faster than I used to. These changes didn't scare me the way they once might have. They felt like reminders. Reminders that time was still moving, whether I resisted it or not. For most of my life, I lived as if the future was something I could fix with enough effort. If I worked hard enough, saved enough, stayed strong enough, everything would turn out fine. But now, standing where I was, I understood something different. You don't control how life turns out. You only control how honestly you live inside it. I started thinking more about what would remain after I was gone. Not money, not belongings, not proof of sacrifice. Those things fade quickly. What stays is memory. And memory is shaped by how people felt around you. That realization changed how I showed up in the world. I spoke slower. I listened longer. I didn't rush conversations the way I used to. I stopped multitasking when someone talked to me. I wanted people to feel seen, because I knew what it felt like not to be. My relationship with my son continued to grow in quiet ways. Not dramatic, not public, just steady. Sometimes weeks passed without talking. Sometimes we spoke twice in one day. I learned not to measure closeness by frequency. I measured it by honesty. One afternoon, he invited me to go for a walk. Just the two of us. No plan. No destination. We walked slowly through a park near his home. Trees moved gently in the breeze. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. He asked me about my childhood. No one had ever asked me that before. I told him stories I hadn't thought about in years. About my parents. Their struggles. Their silence. The way emotions were handled in our home. Or not handled. As I spoke, I understood something important. I hadn't invented my way of loving. I had inherited it. An inheritance isn't destiny. It's just a starting point. That walk felt like a bridge between generations, between mistakes and understanding. I realized then that healing doesn't just move forward. It moves backward too. It touches the past and changes how you carry it. As I grew older, my priorities continued to shift. I no longer chased approval. I no longer needed to prove my worth through exhaustion. I allowed myself joy in small things. Morning light, a good meal, a meaningful conversation. I let go of urgency. I let go of the belief that I had to matter loudly to matter at all. I mattered quietly. That was enough. I also accepted something else. My son would never see me the way I once wanted him to. And that was okay, because he didn't need a hero. He needed a father who was real. And I finally became that. Not when he was a child, but when he was grown. Late love is still love. Late understanding is still understanding. One evening, we talked about the wedding again. Not with pain, with reflection. He told me he wished things had gone differently, that he regretted how I felt that day. I told him something I hadn't said before. I don't want that moment to define us. He nodded. Neither do I. And just like that, it lost its power. The moment that once felt like an ending became a turning point. A hard one, but necessary. As I looked at my life honestly, I realized something else. I had spent years believing I was invisible. But invisibility isn't always imposed. Sometimes it's chosen. I hid behind work. I hid behind strength. I hid behind silence. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know another way. Now, I was choosing differently. I spoke when something mattered. I asked for help when I needed it. I allowed people to see me when I felt weak. That vulnerability didn't make me smaller. It made me lighter. I thought about legacy again, and I understood something deeply. Legacy isn't what people say about you. It's what they carry from you. The way they love. The way they speak. The way they allow themselves to feel. If my son learned anything from me, I hoped it wasn't just endurance. I hoped it was growth. As years passed, our relationship settled into something peaceful. Not intense. Not distant. Balanced. There were no more expectations about roles or obligations. Just mutual respect and quiet affection. One day, while helping him with something small, he said something that caught me off guard. "You know, I talk about you more than you think." I smiled. That was enough. Not recognition. Connection. I didn't need to be centered. I needed to be included. And I was. As I sit here now, reflecting on everything that happened, I understand the truth more clearly than ever. Life doesn't punish you for being imperfect. It teaches you through consequence. And sometimes the lessons hurt. Sometimes they arrive late. But if you're willing to listen, they still have meaning. I worked 2 jobs to raise my son. I gave him what I thought he needed. I missed what he actually needed. And I lived long enough to understand the difference. That understanding didn't erase the pain, but it transformed it. Pain became wisdom. Loss became clarity. And silence became voice. What remains now isn't regret. It's gratitude. Gratitude that we found our way back to each other. Not to rewrite the past, but to walk forward with honesty. And that, to me, feels like a life fully lived. There comes a point in life when you stop counting years forward and start looking backward without fear. I reached that point without realizing it. One morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun had not fully risen yet. The room was still, the kind of stillness that feels gentle instead of lonely. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to my breathing. It felt steady, calm. That was new. For most of my life, my thoughts raced ahead of me. Bills, schedules, responsibilities, worries about what would happen if I slowed down. Now, slowing down felt natural. I wasn't running from anything anymore. I had learned to live with my story instead of fighting it. As the years passed, my son and I found a rhythm that felt right for both of us. We didn't talk every day. We didn't need to. When we did talk, it wasn't forced. It wasn't filled with expectation. It was just honest. Sometimes we talked about deep things. Sometimes we talked about nothing important at all. And I learned that both mattered. One afternoon, he called me out of the blue. "Dad, I just wanted to hear your voice." That sentence stayed with me for a long time. I didn't need to be useful in that moment. I didn't need advice or solutions. I just needed to exist. That was something I had never allowed myself before. I started thinking about how much of my life I had spent trying to earn my place. As a provider, as a father, as a man, I believed love had to be justified. Now I knew better. Love doesn't need proof. It needs presence. I noticed how differently I carried myself now. I walked slower. I listened without interrupting. I allowed pauses in conversation. I didn't rush to fill silence. Silence no longer scared me, because silence didn't mean absence anymore. It meant comfort. I also noticed how my son had changed. He spoke more openly about his emotions. He admitted when he felt overwhelmed. He didn't hide behind confidence the way he once did. I saw myself in him, but I also saw growth. That filled me with a quiet pride. Not the loud kind. The kind that sits gently in your chest and warms you from the inside. I realized something else during this time. We often talk about what parents give their children, but we rarely talk about what children give back. My son gave me perspective. He showed me the cost of silence. He taught me that love unspoken can still wound, even when intentions are good. He gave me a second chance to be present, not when he needed guidance, but when he needed honesty. That gift changed me. I stopped worrying about how I would be remembered. I focused on how I showed up now, because legacy isn't built at the end of life. It's built in everyday moments. The tone of your voice, the patience you show, the space you make for others. I began mentoring a younger man at work. He reminded me of myself years ago. Always tired, always stressed, always trying to carry everything alone. One day, he said something that felt familiar. I don't want my kids to think I don't care. I looked at him and said the truth. Then show them, not by what you give, but by how you listen. I wish someone had told me that sooner. But maybe I wasn't ready to hear it back then. I accepted that too. We don't always learn lessons when they're offered. We learn them when we're ready. I also thought a lot about forgiveness. Not just forgiving my son, forgiving myself. That took longer. There were moments when old guilt resurfaced, when I wondered if things could have been different if I had known better earlier. But guilt without growth is useless. I learned to let it go. I reminded myself that I acted with the tools I had at the time. I didn't know what I didn't know, and neither did my son. Forgiveness became a practice, not a single moment, a daily choice. As the years continued, holidays felt lighter. Birthdays felt simpler. There was less pressure to perform happiness. We just showed up. That was enough. One year, my son asked me if I wanted to help him fix something around his house. A small repair. Nothing complicated. As we worked side by side, mostly in silence, I felt something settle inside me. This was what I wanted all along. Not recognition, not praise, just shared presence. Later that day, he thanked me, not for the help, but for coming. That meant more to me than any speech ever could. I understood then that my role had shifted again. I was no longer shaping his future. I was supporting it. That was an honor. I thought about the wedding again. How far away that pain felt now. Not erased, integrated. It became part of the story, not the ending. A chapter that hurt, but also a chapter that led us here. And I was grateful for that. Without that pain, I might never have looked inward. Without that silence, I might never have learned to speak. Without that distance, I might never have learned how to truly connect. Life has a way of teaching hard lessons gently, if you let it. I stopped trying to control outcomes. I started trusting relationships. I stopped trying to be right. I started trying to be real. As I look ahead now, I don't fear being forgotten, because I know what remains. Moments of honesty, moments of listening, moments of shared humanity. That is legacy, not something written on paper, something felt in the heart. I worked 2 jobs to raise my son. I lost parts of myself along the way, and I found something deeper in the end. Understanding, connection, peace. And if this story means anything, it's this. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You just have to be present. I've come to understand that life doesn't hand you clarity on a silver platter. It gives you moments, sometimes brief, sometimes painful, that demand attention. The lessons are hidden in the mundane, in the quiet, in the things you used to ignore. For years, I thought being a father meant providing. It meant working late nights, 2 jobs, sacrificing sleep and comfort. I thought that love was measured by how much I could give materially. I was wrong. Love is measured by presence, by honesty, by showing up, even when it's hard. And not just in big moments, but in the ordinary ones. The days my son came home from school and I didn't drop everything to listen. The evenings I chose work over conversation. The birthdays, the holidays, the little things I thought didn't matter, they did. They mattered more than I realized. That truth hit me hardest on the day of his wedding. I had always imagined being there, celebrated, recognized, part of every memory. But reality was different. I stood on the edge, quiet, invisible, watching life move without me in it. It broke me, and it was supposed to, because in breaking, I learned. I learned that absence leaves a mark. I learned that silence speaks volumes. I learned that you can give everything and still miss what matters most. After the wedding, I could have stayed broken. I could have retreated further into regret. But something inside me shifted. A message, a conversation, a small opening from my son. It didn't erase the past, but it offered a chance to rebuild. Not what I imagined, not what I hoped for when he was a child, but something honest, something new. We started talking again, slowly, carefully, and in that process, I found pieces of myself I thought were lost. I found humility. I found patience. I found courage to say what I needed to say. I found the strength to listen without judgment. And I discovered that reconciliation isn't about erasing mistakes. It's about acknowledging them, owning them, learning from them, and still choosing to connect. I realized that our story, my story, isn't one of failure. It's one of learning, of growth, of love that adapts. I think about all the times I worked so hard, thinking I was protecting him from hardship. I see now that what he needed wasn't protection. It was attention, presence, love that could be felt, not just assumed. And I see that I can't go back and change the past, but I can change the present. And that matters, more than anything. As the years went by, our interactions became simple but meaningful. A shared cup of coffee, a walk in the park, a call just to say hello. Those moments became our language. Quiet, honest, real. I began noticing the little signs of life that matter most. The way someone smiles when you listen, the warmth of a conversation without interruption, the relief in admitting fear without shame. I also started seeing life differently, not as a race to achieve or prove worth, but as a series of moments to be lived fully. I started forgiving myself, not in one moment, but slowly, daily, for all the things I thought I did wrong, for the times I missed, for the love I thought I couldn't give. And in that forgiveness, I found freedom. I began sharing this freedom with others, friends, family, colleagues, not by preaching, but by being present, by listening, by showing that love doesn't have to be perfect to matter. I also realized something about legacy. It's not about achievements. It's not about money or possessions. It's about the lives you touch, the moments you choose to be honest and real, the courage to stay, even when it's uncomfortable. My son and I still carry our shared history. The wedding, the distance, the silence. It's all there, but it no longer defines us. It informs us, guides us, reminds us to value the time we have and the words we share. I think about my own father sometimes. How little I understood him when I was young. How much I took for granted. I see now that every generation learns slowly. Through mistakes, through distance, through love that isn't perfect. And I see that healing can happen at any time. Even late. Even when you think it's too late. Because life keeps giving opportunities to show up. To forgive. To speak. To listen. And the choice is always ours. I have learned to cherish those choices. The chance to connect again with my son. The chance to finally listen without fear. The chance to give and receive love in its imperfect, human form. That is what remains. Not the money spent. Not the hours worked. Not the things I thought would define my worth. But the quiet moments of presence. The honesty shared. The understanding earned. That is life's true reward. And in that, I have found peace. As I sit and think about my life, I realize the truth about love is quieter than we imagine. It doesn't roar. It doesn't demand recognition. It shows up in small, steady ways. It's the voice that says, I'm here, even when no one notices. It's the hand that waits patiently, the ear that listens without judgment, the heart that stays open, even after being hurt. I learned that too late, of course. The wedding taught me a lesson I wish I had known sooner. That love without presence is fragile. That silence can wound as much as words. And that intentions, no matter how noble, are not enough. We are not judged by what we plan or what we try to give. We are judged by what we actually share. The truth hit me hardest when my son finally reached out. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a letter, a gift, or an apology. It was a simple message. I just wanted to hear your voice. And that was enough. It reminded me that love doesn't always need explanation. Sometimes, it simply needs to exist. Over time, I began understanding the kind of father I wanted to be. Not one who sacrifices endlessly, silently, and unseen, but one who is fully present. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. I realized my mistakes didn't have to define the rest of my life. They could inform it. They could guide me. And through that guidance, I found my way back to my son. We built a new rhythm together. A rhythm not based on expectations, but on honesty. We shared small moments, ordinary moments, and in them, our bond grew stronger than ever. I also started seeing the world differently. I treated people around me with more patience. I listened more. I judged less. I learned to value presence over perfection. Because perfection is an illusion. Presence is real. I thought a lot about forgiveness during this time. Not only forgiving my son for the distance, but forgiving myself for the mistakes I made along the way. For the times I worked too much. For the times I thought I was protecting him by staying silent. For the times I wasn't brave enough to be emotional, to be honest, to be fully present. Forgiveness became a daily practice. Sometimes it was hard. Sometimes it required me to look at myself and admit the truth I had been avoiding for years. But slowly it healed me. And that healing allowed me to be fully present for my son now. I started to understand something else, too. Life is not about grand gestures. It's not about heroics or dramatic redemption. It's about the everyday choices. To be present, to listen, to love, even when it's difficult, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you feel invisible. Those small acts accumulate into a legacy, not one written in money or objects, but one written in hearts and memories. I think about my son's future, the children he may have one day. I want him to remember not my sacrifices, but my presence, not my words, but my honesty, not my perfection, but my willingness to be human. That is the legacy I hope to leave. And it's a legacy that anyone can create, no matter their past mistakes. We are never too late to show up. We are never too late to speak, to listen, to love. I also realize that life is fragile. Time is fleeting, and we cannot afford to wait for perfect moments to express love. The moments we have are enough. They are the only moments we have. I used to worry about whether I did enough for my son. Now I understand it's not about quantity. It's about quality. The presence, the honesty, the patience. Those are the things that last. One evening, I sat with him, not speaking, just being. He smiled at something small, a joke, a memory I can't remember, and I felt warmth spread across my chest, a peace I had not felt in decades. I realized in that moment that love doesn't always need recognition. It simply needs to exist, and that is enough. We cannot change the past. We cannot undo the mistakes we made, but we can choose how we live now, how we show up, how we love. I have learned that love is patient, even when tested. It is forgiving, even when wounded. It is courageous, even when afraid. And it is steady, even when unseen. That understanding has transformed my life. I am no longer anxious about being forgotten, no longer consumed by guilt or regret. I know what matters. The quiet moments, the honest conversations, the willingness to stay, to be present, to love fully, imperfectly, humanly. And that, I realize now, is all anyone can ask for. It is enough. It is more than enough. It is life. The years continued, moving quietly, almost imperceptibly. I began noticing small things that once passed me by. The way sunlight hits the kitchen in the morning. The sound of leaves rustling against the window. The laughter of strangers on the street. The gentle rhythm of life continuing around me. I realized that beauty is often subtle. And love, the deepest kind, is too. I think about my son now. Not as the child who ignored me at his wedding. Not as the young man I worried would never understand my sacrifices. But as someone who grew, just like I did. Someone who learned patience. Someone who discovered the value of presence. Someone who chose to rebuild a connection despite fear. That choice alone spoke volumes. And it taught me more than any lesson I could have forced upon him. I often reflect on mistakes. The choices I wish I had made differently. The time lost to fear, pride, or misunderstanding. But I no longer dwell in regret. I live in understanding. I live in acknowledgement of the past, without letting it dictate the present. I have learned that life's hardest lessons often come with the deepest gifts. Loss, silence, distance. These were not punishments. They were invitations. Invitations to grow, to forgive, to see clearly, to love with honesty, not assumption. I think about all the fathers out there, working tirelessly, thinking their love is proven only by what they provide. I want them to know, love is proven by presence, by patience, by vulnerability, by willingness to be seen, even when it feels uncomfortable. I think about all the children who feel unseen, unrecognized, or distant from their parents. I want them to know, their worth isn't measured by the sacrifices their parents make. It's measured by the moments they share, the conversations they have, the honesty they offer. My story is not unique. It's a story of humanity, of imperfection, of learning late, but learning deeply. I have discovered that silence can be healed with words, if you are brave enough to speak them. Distance can be bridged with presence, if you are patient enough to walk slowly. And love can survive mistakes, if it is nurtured with honesty, empathy, and courage. I think about my own life. The hours worked, the nights spent alone, the sacrifices made with good intentions but flawed execution. And I forgive myself, because love is not perfect. It is human. It is messy. It is patient. It is steady. It is relentless in its quiet insistence that we try again. I look at my son now. We don't need grand gestures. We don't need declarations. We need moments. Small ones, real ones, shared ones. And in these moments, we are rebuilding what we lost. What matters is not how we began, but how we continue, how we choose to show up each day, how we choose to be present, to listen, to speak, to love. I am grateful for mistakes, for distance, for fear, for they taught me what presence really means. I am grateful for my son, for his patience, for his courage, for the willingness to reconnect, for allowing me to finally be the father I always wanted to be. Not perfect, not always right, but honest, and present, and fully human. I am grateful for life itself, for the chance to learn, to grow, to forgive, to love, for the moments that matter, even when they are small, even when they are ordinary, even when they are quiet. I realize now that the ultimate gift we can give is our presence. Not wealth, not advice, not perfection. Presence, attention, love that speaks in actions more than words. This is the legacy I leave, not in material form, not in accolades or achievements, but in memory, in heart, in moments of connection that ripple through generations. I worked 2 jobs to raise my son. I lost parts of myself along the way. I learned lessons I wish I had known sooner. I was broken by silence. I was healed by honesty. And I finally understand this. Life is not about never failing. It's about learning, forgiving, and showing up again. Every day, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it feels too late. Because it's never too late to be present, to love, to connect. And that, more than anything, is what remains. The quiet, unwavering truth of a life lived fully, humanly, and with love. And for that, I am at peace.